Hey there, and welcome to the latest episode of Rabbit Hole. I'm your host, Chris Valenti, and tonight we're going to be doing a deep dive into the Treaty of Versailles. Now, why are we doing this? We're doing this because the Russia-Ukraine conflict is finally coming to an end, seemingly, and the United States and Russia have proposed some ceasefire terms to the Ukrainians, which, according to a lot of economists and historians, are quite literally worse than the Treaty of Versailles. Now, if you don't know what the Treaty of Versailles is, that's the treaty that ended World War I and guaranteed a Second World War. I wrote my college thesis on this. Plenty of historians, including people living at the time, said that a Second World War is guaranteed because of how shitty this treaty is. And we're going to do a little deep dive into it. Before we get into it, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and donate $7,000 to the channel. Let's get started with a little bit of a deep dive. First thing I want to do is just bring up the wiki for World War I. I'm a huge World War I head. I know that not everybody is. A lot of people are really into World War II, but let's just talk about this for a second. World War I was responsible for around 40 million casualties, somewhere between that, right? And we've got right here, World War I, or the First World War, also known as the Great War, was a global conflict between two coalitions, the Allies, or the Triple Entente, and the Central Powers. Fighting took place in mainly Europe, whatever, but let's get down here. 10 million military dead, and more than 20 million wounded. Right, so that ends up adding up to around 40 million casualties, and the number's probably a lot bigger considering how many people were blown to smithereens, and we'll never get a record of them. But World War I was, in my opinion, the most earth-shattering conflict that humanity had ever been through. Okay, I understand there were more casualties in World War II, but I believe that World War II, Luigi, was a consequence of this treaty. So I want to talk about how a treaty can lead to such a nightmare, how the peace treaty of World War I led to the nightmare of World War II. And what's important to talk about is that Germany did not start World War I. Okay? Historians still argue today about who started World War I. There's people call the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand the match that lit the Powder Keg, meaning these tensions had been building up for a very long time, especially with the fact that Germany was like 80 or 90 years behind its competing neighbors because, they were left out of the Treaty of Westphalia, and Germany, it didn't become a unified nation until, I think, the 1880s, right? So when World War I comes around, a unified Germany is frankly new. And when the whole world starts to kick off going crazy and Russia threatens to invade Germany because Germany's got an alliance that is bringing them into a war, when Russia threatens to invade Germany, the Germans don't consider themselves the bad guy. They consider themselves the victim, right? And this is where the miscommunication begins. So let's just talk about this. In 1918, Woodrow Wilson, who was the U.S. president, this is during the war, he lays out what he called the 14 points, right? And this was essentially a plan for world peace, and it's very comprehensive, but here on the right we have them summarized, right? Now, the first 7 of these points are pretty much focused around, like, territorial stuff, like, what are we going to do about the territory around Germany and Europe now that this war is going to come to a close? And then the second part of it was really just about a lasting world peace, right? Luigi and Beans are fighting over there. So we've got point number 1, open diplomacy without secret treaties. That's good, and it was immediately violated. Economic free trade on the seas during war and peace. That's good, immediately violated. Equal trade conditions, good, violated. Decrease armaments among all nations, good and violated. Adjust colonial claims, good, not exactly violated. Evacuation of all Central Powers from Russia and allow it to define its own independence. That was good, and it was not violated. Belgium to be evacuated and restored, good, not violated. Return of Alsace-Lorraine region to end all French territories, that's debatably good, but it was not violated. Readjust Italian borders, debatably good, not violated. Austria-Hungary to be provided an opportunity for self-determination. That did end up happening, good, and it wasn't exactly violated. It was violated 20 years later by Hitler. Redraw the borders of the Balkan regions, including Romania, Serbia, and Montenegro. Not bad, also not violated. The creation of a Turkish state with guaranteed free trades. That was good. Creation of an independent Polish state. That is good. And the creation of the League of Nations. That is incredibly good, because the League of Nations pulls us into our next point. The League of Nations was essentially the early inception of the United Nations, right? So let's do this. Let's get through what the League of Nations is. The League of Nations, or in French, the Société des Nations, it was the first worldwide intergovernmental organization whose principal mission was to maintain world peace. Now, what's funny about this is that I don't believe Germany was even invited to the League of Nations. If you don't know this, how we're relating this to today is Ukraine wasn't even invited to the peace talks between Russia and the United States, which is, it's elementary. You have to invite the people that you are deciding the future on, otherwise you get shit like this. Okay, so let's learn from history a little bit. So the League of Nations was founded on January 10th, 1920 by the Paris Peace Conference. Now, the Paris Peace Conference, here's the thing. When the Armistice was announced, okay, on November 11th at 11:11 a.m., 1918, which is hilarious. I love how world leaders are like, let's find a cute time. Meanwhile, us, the working class, are literally bleeding out in fucking battlefields. They're like, let's do it at 11:11. But the Armistice, it was a ceasefire, right? The Armistice doesn't actually end the war. It's just a guarantee that we're going to have some peace talks. So this Armistice in 1919 at 11/11/11, right? It ended up guaranteeing that, Germany and the Triple Entente, the Central Powers, they would have peace talks and we would try to find a resolution to this. Or at least that's what the Germans thought, right? So when the Germans hear about the Armistice, at first, they're not exactly too opposed to it. And something I want to point out here is that the Armistice itself was signed by French Marshal Ferdinand Foch, okay? And also a bunch of other people, but French Marshal Ferdinand Foch. And what is that noise? That's beans. And Ferdinand Foch is important because he's going to come back later. Ferdinand Foch, he signed the Armistice, but when the actual Treaty of Versailles was eventually proposed, he refused to sign it. And he said, this is no peace. This is a ceasefire for 20 years. And he was right. 20 years later, World War II breaks out as a consequence of all the shitty stipulations. And don't worry, we're going to get to the stipulations, right? So when you talk about the military leaders of World War I, especially the German ones, these German leaders, when they signed the Armistice, they didn't think that they were surrendering. You know what I'm saying? Because the fighting kept on going. They didn't think that they were going to be sacrificing giant parts of their nation in order to appease the Triple Entente. What they believed was that what was happening was just a way for Germany to come to the table and so that we could stop all of the bloodshed. They were wrong. This peace conference between all of the different world leaders, it lasted over a year long. I believe it started in, I think I have my notes here. The peace conference started on January 12th, 1919, and it lasted until January 20th of 1920, right? So that peace conference is over a year long where the German people are wondering what their future is going to look like, right? But the thing is, this peace talk, it was really dominated by the Big Three plus one more. Some people call it the Big Four. I refuse to, okay? So the Big Four would be in reference to, give me their fucking pictures, Woodrow Wilson, okay? Oh, let me bring this back up. My apologies. Woodrow Wilson, United States. David Lloyd George, Great Britain or the United Kingdom. Georges Clemenceau of France. And then to a small degree, Vittorio Orlando from Italy, right? Now, the thing is, although these four guys were really leading the charge in terms of the peace deal, they disagreed on almost everything, right? Think about it like this. Georges Clemenceau, leader of France, or the representative of France at the time, France got fucking demolished by the Germans. So the French, they wanted revenge, right? The Brits, they wanted more money. They wanted to help Germany come back a little bit so that they could get, good trade. And Woodrow Wilson, even though he was relatively a scumbag, he wanted Germany to not be able to, he didn't want another world war under any circumstance, which is why he wanted the creation of the League of Nations. And then Vittorio Orlando, all he really wanted to do was fucking expand the Italian Empire, just like every other Italian greedy. But, let's get into some of the information regarding what their demands were. So I actually made a little list for you guys. So when it came to the stipulations of the treaty, it was really split up into three different groups, right? So let's talk about the territorial aspect of this. Germany was forced to turn over the Saar Basin to France for 15 years. Now, that is not only a massive piece of land, but that basin, it was a huge industrial area. So this is not only territorial, but it fucks with the German economy right off the bat. Germany was forced to give Alsace-Lorraine back to France, which had been in, I believe, I wrote the 1840s. I don't believe that is correct. Let's double check. When did the Germans take Alsace-Lorraine? It was probably the 1870s, my bad. Okay, so the Germans, they took Alsace-Lorraine from the French in the 1870s. It's not like they took that during World War I. That had been German territory for nearly 40 years at this point, and it was just thrown in there. It was a little petty bullshit. Alsace-Lorraine goes back to France, which at this point, it had a lot of German people living there. Now, the Germans had to demilitarize the Rhineland. Now, if you don't know where the Rhineland is, Rhineland, give it to me. Here's most of Germany. The Rhineland is that western border that is encroaching upon places like Poland and Belgium and France, right? It's where, if that's where you want your military, is protecting the outskirts, you know, so that you can expand. And they were forced to demilitarize the entire Rhineland, right? Germany was forced to respect Austrian independence. Germany was forced to recognize Czechoslovakia as an independent nation. Prussia went to Poland, Prussian territory. And Germany lost all of their African and Chinese colonies. Now, here's the thing, guys. Let's talk about this in reverse. Germany losing all their African and Chinese colonies? Good. We don't like colonization. Problem is, America, England, and fucking France don't have to give up none of their colonies. This isn't about decolonization. It's about punishing Germany, right? And then we've got Prussia goes to Poland, right? Now, sure, sounds great, but that land was German. I'm not saying that the Germans were entitled to it. I'm saying that everything that you are doing is simply punishment, right? Czechoslovakia has to be recognized as an independent nation. I got no problem with that. Austrian independence, I got no problem with that. But the thing is, a lot of people in Austria were fucking German. And you wonder why an Austrian man, Adolf Hitler, was able to become the Chancellor of Germany. It's because the Austrians and the Germans had a very tight-knit relationship. They didn't want to be fucking separated. Okay? And Alsace-Lorraine, come on, you're being fucking petty. Saar Basin, you're just fucking with the economy. So you start to see already, most of this shit is proposed by France. It's all proposed by France. Give us your fucking land back. That's essentially what France is saying. Now, the military, this is when we start to now hopefully you're going to start to understand why the Germans were so fucking pissed. The German army was reduced from 1.9 million to 100,000. That is insane. That is like taking away someone's fucking arms. You know what I'm trying to say? Now, on top of that, the German army, the German military entirely was disarmed greatly, right? Now, when I say disarmed, I don't mean their guns were taken away. I do mean a shitload of guns were taken away, but the ammo, right? When it came to things like artillery guns, which could fire across borders into the next nation, they limited the amount of ammo that they were allowed to have. It was limited to something like 500 shells per artillery cannon or some fucking shit like that. The German Navy was shrunk down. They were like, you could have 6 aircraft carriers, you could have 6 destroyers, 6 of this, 6 of that. So the German Navy was just, didn't stand a chance against the British Navy in the future. They were allowed to have no submarines, which is the brand new feature of warfare, and it was pivotal in World War II. You know, imagine if the Germans weren't allowed to have their U-boats during World War II. They were allowed to have no air force except for 100 fucking seaplanes. Here's a seaplane, by the way, which was, they literally were just using this for mine sweeping to force the Germans to get rid of the mines that they laid throughout the ocean. So, and no Zeppelins. Now, if you play Battlefield 1, you know what a Zeppelin is. I'll just show you real quick. World War I. Zeppelin. Now, I'll be frank, the no Zeppelin rule, I don't really give a fuck about that because the Zeppelins didn't really play a huge role in World War II. They were really just ridiculous. It is a ridiculous concept, to be frank. Regardless, that's the military punishment, right? So we've got territorial punishment, military punishment, and now the final nail in the coffin when it comes to Germany is the economic punishment, okay? The war guilt clause Germany was forced to sign the War Guild Clause, which essentially meant that Germany had to admit that they were the bad guy. They were the villain. They started the war, even though most Germans, like average Germans, believe that it was self-defense from Russia. The Germans didn't fucking assassinate Archduke Franz Ferdinand. The Germans weren't part of the Serbia, Yugoslavia, fucking Austria-Hungary conflict. The Germans were called upon by their ally, and Russia was called upon by their ally. So when Russia says we're going to invade Germany, you know, Tsar Nicholas, it tells his cousin, Kaiser Wilhelm, the leader of Russia, Tsar Nicholas tells his cousin, Kaiser Wilhelm, he says, hey, I'm coming into Germany. That's a fucking family feud, and you end up killing fucking 45 million fucking people. Regardless. So, the War Guild Clause, which immediately makes Germans start to just resent Europe, okay? We've got the Allied powers demanded $33 billion from Germany, which today would be $500 billion, okay? And again, guys, according to the economists, Ukraine is going to be forced to pay more in GDP to the United States than that $500 billion. According to the economists, this is, allegedly, this deal is forcing Ukraine to pay more in their GDP than the $500 billion that Germany was forced to pay after World War I. And mind you, Germany only paid back World War I in 2015, okay? I don't even think they're done paying off World War II. Right? So this amount of fucking money, it just destroys the German economy. It quite literally causes fucking World War II. And this brings us back to Ferdinand Foch. I told you, Ferdinand Foch. Let's bring him up here. This is the guy who signed the fucking Armistice because he thought this was an armistice, not like a cutting off my balls, neuter me deal, right? Ferdinand Foch famously says, I'm not signing this fucking treaty. I'm not signing the Treaty of Versailles. Because this isn't a fucking peace treaty. This is a ceasefire. We're going to be back in the battlefield in 20 fucking years. And he was right. Okay? So, again, this is when you start, this is how, we're going to tie it in, this is how you start to see the rise of Nazism in Germany, right? This causes massive debt. Massive debt in Germany, hyperinflation, where the Lend-Lease Act, America is sending all this money over to Germany. The Weimar Republic is just printing out more and more money to try and pay back all of this incredible fucking debt that they have. And in the meantime, France occupies the Ruhr, which is a massive industrial region, and I believe they take like 4 out of 5 jobs. They start claiming like 80% of the jobs, and it's only going to French people, even though most of the people living here are Germans. So the Germans are going on strike, and then the Great Depression of 1929 hits. And when that fucking Great Depression hits in America and we're lending money to Germany, we get inflation. They get hyperinflation. Germans are literally taking fucking wheelbarrows of German marks to go get a loaf of bread. Motherfuckers are using it as tinder to stay warm, okay? Their money becomes worthless, right? And this is why you start to see the rise of the Dolchstoßmyth. So let me pull up the Dolchstoßmyth. The Dolchstoßmyth is the stab in the back myth, right? It's a conspiracy theory where they blamed Germany's defeat on internal enemies, right? It's very anti-Semitic and anti-communist. They were blamed. So essentially, the theory began when it became clear that Germany was going to lose. They claimed the German army was not defeated on the battlefield, but was betrayed by the Jews, the socialists, and the communists, right? And a lot of this is because the soldiers agreed to a ceasefire. They agreed to an armistice. And then suddenly, the most insane stipulations are forced upon them to the point where the Germans don't even, the Germans refer to it as a fucking diktat, right? The German word diktat refers to the harsh treatment of Germany after World War I. All of these stipulations that I just read off to you, they don't consider them stipulations. The Germans are saying, no, this is a fucking diktat. You are dictators forcing this upon us, and you are going to destroy all of us, paying large reparations to the Allies, limiting our military, giving up land, giving up colonies, accepting responsibility for a war that we didn't start, putting Kaiser Wilhelm on trial. It just kept on rising. And the Germans, they don't want to believe that they did anything wrong. So when a party starts to rise that is saying, yo, you Germans didn't do shit, it's them, it's the Jews, it's the socialists, right? Then that's when you start to see the rise of nationalism, right? And people start labeling their leaders as the November criminals. November meaning, 11/11, the appeasement. Or, sorry, not the appeasement, the armistice. Where is it? Yeah, see, 11/11, right? So you start to see more and more Germans are getting fucking furious with their own government. They feel betrayed, and nationalism starts to rise. They're like, I'm proud to be a German, and Germany needs to come back. Germany needs to get our land back and our money back and everything back. And everything that I named here, Hitler used to get back, right? Hitler, when it comes to the territory, right, he took back Alsace-Lorraine, right? And he wouldn't have had to take it back if the fucking French never took it. Hitler, he took back the Rhineland. He remilitarized the Rhineland. Everything that he did, the people cheered for because all of it was ripped away from them. He fuck Austrian independence. He unifies Germany with Austria. He takes over Czechoslovakia. He takes over Poland. He takes over Africa. He doesn't really do shit with China, but you see the point that I'm trying to make is the people cheered for this because everything was taken away from them. He says, fuck you to France when it comes to building up the army. He builds the army right back up. He says, I don't give a shit about this diktat. I'm building the army back. He rearms the army. He rebuilds the navy. He rebuilds the air force. Everything that Hitler was able to do was only because the rest of the world punished Germany tremendously for a war that Germany didn't cause. Did Germany take advantage of World War II World War I to try and expand their empire as far as they possibly could? Absolutely. Did Germany cause most of the bloodshed? Absolutely. However, even French General Ferdinand Foch knew this is going to start another fucking war. Because when you put an entire nation into the corner like that, the only way for them to get out is by biting. And the only reason why the German people were capable of falling for the whole fascist shtick, the only reason why they were so susceptible to the hatred and the anger that is required in order to become a fascist nation, is because they were living in desperation. There was a housing crisis. Nobody could afford eggs. Nobody could afford bread. Everything was fucked. And guys, this treaty that apparently we're proposing onto Ukraine, listen, I'm telling you, you're gonna cause Ukraine to turn so defensive, so afraid of the United States, of Russia, of everyone around them, that you're going to cause a massive problem, a massive nationalistic movement in Ukraine. I'm calling it now. On February 22nd, 2025, if the stipulations of this treaty between Russia and Ukraine are indeed as bad, if not worse, than the Treaty of Versailles, then this conflict does not end. It pauses. Again, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the rabbit hole. I'm your host, Chris Valenti. Please like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and donate $7,000 to the channel. I'll see you in the next video. Bye. I fucked up